In the meantime, the New York Times has moved on to Ted Cruz. The New York Times is now attacking Ted Cruz's father. This is Caleb Howe reporting of the right scoop since the CNBC debate. The media, their allies in left-wing blogs and Hillary Clinton campaign surrogates, masquerading as nonprofits like Media Matters, have all launched an aggressive attack on the Republican candidates. You might think it was revenge for calling out obvious media bias. One might think that in seeking that revenge, they are also proving the GOP right. The latest target on the media hit list is Ted Cruz, whose blistering assault on CNBC moderators became practically legendary only minutes after he delivered it. But rather than attacking Cruz's own history, the New York Times is going after his father's history, from when he was under the thumb of the brutal dictator of an oppressed nation. Here's what the New York Times writes. Since he was a boy, Senator Ted Cruz has said all he wanted to do was fight for liberty, a yearning that he says was first kindled when he heard his father's tales of fighting as a rebel leader in Cuba in the 1950s, throwing Molotov cocktails, running guns, and surviving torture. Those stories, retold by Mr. Cruz and by his father Rafael, have hooked Republican audiences and given emotional power to the message that the Texas senator is pushing as an increasingly serious contender for the party's presidential nomination. In their telling, the father's experience in Cuba becomes a parable for the son's nightmarish vision of government overreach under President Obama. But the family narrative that has provided such inspirational fire and biographical heft to Cruz speeches, debate performances, and a recently published memoir is his father's Cuban contemporaries say an embroidered one. In other words, the New York Times saying that Ted Cruz and his dad are lying about the father's oppressive experiences and struggles in Cuba. Now, much as Mark Halperin asked Ted Cruz for his favorite Cuban recipes and to say some things in Spanish because, of course, they wanted to prove that Cruz really wasn't Hispanic, that he didn't hold the similarities for the struggle that Hispanics face, that he was really too white. I mean, he's a white Hispanic, through and through white, and he was just using the Hispanic link much the way Pocahontas did Elizabeth Warren in claiming she had Indian blood. They're trying to delegitimize the whole Cruz-Cuban connection. And so Ted Cruz, reacting to this, says after 7 years, the New York Times cannot unearth a college transcript of Barack Obama, but they'll send reporters to Cuba to interview Communist Party officials to attack my dad. Which is exactly right. That's exactly what they're not interested in Obama's transcripts. They're not interested in Obama's performance in college. They're not interested in anything that could refute anything Obama has said or done. But they will send reporters to Cuba to try to discredit Cruz by interviewing communist dictators about Ted Cruz's dad. It's just a total waste of time. This is the kind of thing that people are seeing through now. By the way, Ben Carson, one of the stories that the media says he's made up is this prank test, this hoax test that he took at Yale. Are you familiar with that? Well, it turns out a former staff member of the Yale Record says that he recalls many of the details of a prank that Dr. Carson wrote about in his autobiography. The incident has been the subject of media coverage in recent days after the Wall Street Journal reported on Friday that it found no evidence to support Carson's claim that he was a victim of a hoax that led him to take a fake psychology test, as he wrote in his 1990 autobiography, Gifted Hands. Now, my question is, when did the absence of evidence become evidence? The Wall Street Journal reported Friday it found no evidence to support Carson's claim he was a victim of a hoax. Okay, so no evidence means that there's evidence? No. Let me be clear. Back to the Cruz story. This is the New York Times story on Ted Cruz that boils down to this. Cruz's father claims he was detained and beaten for trying to recruit someone to fight Castro. The New York Times found a guy who was part of an anti-Castro group who says Cruz's dad was only detained for having a gun. The New York Times story is simply about that difference. They're trying to point out that Ted Cruz's dad is a giant liar because of that little bitty incidental difference in what happened. And so they're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, and that's the extent they're going to. Never anything close to any effort like that to destroy Democrats.